see the person's faith for yourself, then you realize how much you can esteem another person and maybe go beyond, a little bit beyond yourself and your own likes or dislikes to make community with someone that's totally not like you. So I just want to encourage you, before this day is over, to notice those things that have made you come alive a little bit. Maybe the sharings, maybe the silence, maybe the finding, that there is something else happening that you might want to go to. Allow the Lord to speak to that. That's kind of what I mean about listening to the Lord and giving your response. Sometimes it's not so much just what you say, that's prayer, but it's what you actually put into practice. Imagine that. Imagine. So maybe he's inviting you. Maybe he's inviting you to start something up. Open your door and invite your sisters in the Lord to have some time for sharing or faith or who knows what. The Spirit is infinitely creative, so we just try our best to show up. I was thinking about this afternoon's talk, and I was thinking about my relationship with Mary and this whole question of community and being with others and the good it can do in our hearts, but the ways that it can kind of pull out the worst in us. And when I was stationed in Miami, as I mentioned, I was learning Spanish, but I knew Italian. So when I would talk to the folks that were mainly Spanish speakers that would come into our book center, you never know what you're gonna get, And this gentleman came and we were chatting, and he goes, "Oh, are you a little Italian nun?" Because I thought I was speaking Spanish to him. Turned out I was speaking Italian. So I was making a journey. The best was to be in front of a person. At least I could realize I was speaking Italian and not Spanish. But the hardest thing was if they called on the phone, because there's something about another language on the phone. You can't see their face, you can't see their hand gestures. Who knows what they're asking for? So this one day the phone rang, and I answered the phone, and it was a woman speaking Spanish, and she would have a black belt in speed, of speed. So I'm like thinking, okay, Lord, you gotta help me. So I figured if I would listen for the key words, then I would probably be able to get what she was asking and then respond. So I'm listening, and everything I would have thought I would have heard was not present. So normally, because we work in books and music, you listen for libro, musica, video, whatever, nothing. All I thought I heard over and over again were food words, like food, like, are you trying to place an order? Do you want a burrito? So I knew I was lost. So I called our staff member, Luz, and I said, Luz, you have to help me. She was from Nicaragua. I said, can you get on the phone and tell me what this lady means? Ay, sister, okay. She gets on the phone, she's like, wow. I know. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, come on. I would have caught at least some of this. It's like nothing. So she puts the phone down. She's like, Sister Tracey, do you know, this lady has had a vision. I'm like, really? She said, yes. She said, she see the Blessed Mother fry on a tortilla. She wants to know what to do with the tortilla. I was like, I went to school, I learned scripture, theology, philosophy. They did not prepare me for the Blessed Mother on a tortilla. So I was like, tell her I need to pray about it, and I'm going to call her back. And I really did. But the funny thing is, like, because who knows what that meant for her? It's like, it could be the moment of conversion, you know? So I held it in my feminine heart, and I went to the Lord, and if I'm really honest, when I sat before the Lord, I realized that beyond the tortilla issue, I was jealous. I was like, wait a minute, Lord, I'm here giving my life to you. I was kind of going through some hard things in my community, and I felt like, where's my tortilla? How come you didn't show up to me on a tortilla when I needed you? And I was jealous. And I realized that the Lord knows our hearts. He knows how to speak to us. He knows our language. And he was basically telling me, I didn't give you a tortilla because you don't understand tortilla. You understand other things. And by the way, tell her to eat the tortilla. So I called the lady back. Puedes comer. You can eat the tortilla. And don't sell it on eBay. But you know, I can just imagine this sweet lady having that moment in her kitchen. Like, wow, God, you see me? And you care about me enough to show up like this? You know? Or maybe she was thinking, maybe I can make a lot of money on eBay. So this afternoon, I wanted to just open up for us how Mary allows us to hear from God, how she intercedes for us, how she teaches us to be intercessors, which we kind of touched on a little bit this morning, but how all of that comes out of whose we are, who called us into existence, and how our femininity and our dignity as women really have so much to inform us in how we live out our relationships, how we deal with our own mystery. How many of us, we're just mysteries to ourselves? One day we're fine, and the next day we wake up to some kind of diagnosis that we never thought we'd have to face. How we're entrusted with others, our children, our friends, our families, and ultimately how God He's entrusted Himself to us in such beautiful and humble ways. St. Edith Stein is one of my faves when it comes to reflecting on the feminine genius. And she did these essays on women, and I wanted to share with you this beautiful quote from her. She says, "The intrinsic value of woman consists essentially in exceptional receptivity for God's work in the soul." So we'll just pause there and think about the word receptivity. It has so much to do with how we're formed, how we're made. But what she's saying is we're exceptionally receptive to God's work in the soul, to how God moves. So that attentiveness to our emotions, what's happening, also the movements of others, their hearts, their needs. But even more so from the material or natural level, woman has this exceptional receptivity, awareness, ability to perceive God's work in the human soul. So God has made us that way. She goes on, "For an understanding of our unique feminine nature, let us look to the pure love and spiritual maternity of Mary, which is what this day is about. This spiritual maternity is the core of a woman's soul. This holds true whether the woman is married or single, whether she is professional or domestic or both, whether she's a religious in the world or a religious in a monastery. Through this love, a woman, listen to this couple, a woman is God's special weapon in the battle against evil. A woman is God's special weapon in the battle against evil. Her intrinsic value is that she is able to do so because she has a special susceptibility for the works of God in souls, in her own and in others. She relates to others in the Lord's own spirit of love. It's so powerful. The ability that we have to perceive God's work. And what we're here to do today is grow a little bit in refining that ability to kind of connect with people on a deeper level, connect with ourselves. John Paul II also had beautiful things to say about the woman, and especially about our spirit. And he said, the moral and spiritual strength of a woman is joined to her awareness that God entrusts the human being to her in a special way. Of course, God entrusts every human being to each other. I read that wrong. Of course, God entrusts every human being to each and every other human being. But this entrusting concerns women in a special way. A woman is uniquely suited to cradle human life in her womb, in her arms, and in her heart. She possesses a natural instinct to look down with tender compassion on the human face and to be a guardian of fragility. I'm looking at Tobias over there. I just got to hold him. He's 3 weeks old. So he knows the intimacy of his mom, and now he's being cradled in love. And all of us, we are equipped for that. We're made for that. He said, John Paul II said, the woman is the guardian of fragility. She can look down with tender compassion on the human face and be a guardian of fragility. The human person has been entrusted by God to woman in a particular way. And earlier this morning we were talking about Mary and the wedding of Cana. And in many ways, it was her attentiveness, her ability to be present there, which meant that she could handle being entrusted with herself. She was attentive to herself. She was attentive to what was going on around her. So she knew that she was entrusted with all those others at the wedding. She was entrusted with Jesus, her son. And not only that, but she was entrusted with all of us who were to come. Because when she goes to Jesus, there's this funny thing that happens. She goes up to Jesus, she says, they have no more wine. And Jesus doesn't sound like a southern boy. He doesn't say, ma'am. He says this funny thing, woman, what has this to do with me? And every woman in here was probably, if you really think about it, you're like, rude. Rude. What do you do? Talk to your mama like that. You don't talk to your mama like that. What's interesting is that in John's gospel, every time John uses the word woman, it's not to make Jesus sound like he was being a rude northerner. They don't even say that up there. They say mom. But every time John would use the word woman, It was because John is signaling that Jesus is about to change a relationship with the woman he's speaking with. So if you remember Mary Magdalene in the garden, he says, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Here, he says to Mary, his mother, "Woman." And the English is a very odd statement. He says, "Woman, what have you to do with me?" And the Greek, anybody here speak Greek? Me neither. But my study of it is that the way the rendering is he says, "Woman, what to you to me?" And you're like, "Sister, that makes it so much clearer. Thank you." What to you to me? Basically what Jesus is saying is, Mom, if I act now, it's going to change everything for you and everything for me. And he says, my hour has not come. And Mary, like a good mama, pays no attention to what he just said. And she turns to all the servers and she says, do whatever he tells you. Mary sets in motion the beginning of the new creation. Because she did it at the Annunciation, when God sent the angel to bow before her on one knee and ask for her hand to be the mother of his son. And Mary said yes. And Mary, in her being entrusted with the person, knew that she was entrusted as a mother to all of us. And in fact, the other time that Jesus calls his mother woman is from the cross, when he says, woman, behold your son. Entrusting then, all of us, to our mother. So Jesus allows Mary to draw out his mission from him. She says, son, it's time for the new wine. And all of us, there's parts of us that all we have to give the Lord is our water jugs. And we need the Lord's power of transformation to make new wine. When I was stationed here, there were many times where people would come in and I just realized that the Lord called me to this vocation, number one, to kind of have like a front row seat to see all the work that God does in people's hearts, but also to be evangelized. You know, all of us, we have parts of us that believe that God is real and that he can save me. And then there's parts of me that's still a little pagan girl that still doesn't believe. I remember going to confession once and the priest telling me, say the Our Father as penance. And when you get to the part where you say, what's that part? Okay, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. He said, earth is you. And what you're calling God to do is convert that part of you that doesn't want to do his will. You're handing it back to him and you're saying, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on that earth, on this part of me that's still running around like a little pagan. That is entrusting ourselves to God. But also, this one day, one of the things I realized is, as I was listening to these two ladies tell me their story, as I watched their faith, I could feel my own faith grow. So these two ladies, we were about to close the shop, and we're serious about those closing times because we got to go say our prayers and have our supper and do all the things so that we can get up early the next morning. So we're about ready to close, and these two little ladies come in, and it was funny because we were changing our parking lot around, and it was like they could care less where the lines were. They parked, you know how the lines are like this? Well, they parked their car like this. So I was like, this is gonna be fun. So they come in, and they're like, don't worry, we won't be long. So they kind of ramble around, and they go to the back, which is where we have all of our holy cards and our little saint medals, and they're there for a couple minutes, and then they kind of walk back and they put everything on the counter. And I say, I don't know, something tells me you two are some little prayer warriors. And one of them said, well, sister, yes, we are. I said, well, why don't you tell me about that? They're like, well, our city has a lot of bad things, has a lot of violence. Our children are shooting each other in the streets. You said, so me and Mildred take Buford. And I was like, who's Buford? And she points outside. It was their Buick, a brown Buick. Me, Mildred, and Buford drive ourselves to wherever it was that the last shootout happened. And when everybody's gone, when everybody's cleared out, we go there and we give it all back to God. And we put holy medals on that ground that was desecrated by that violence. And we claim it. We claim it for the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm sitting there going, wow, you guys are superstars. And their power of intercession, one could say, who knows what it's doing. But I believe it's a power. Because prayer in faith has a ripple effect. And whoever it was that probably they didn't even know, strangers to them, were not strangers because they shared, they gave their lives to the Lord and they let Him make room in their hearts. They had spiritual maternity, which is what John Paul II is talking about. And they exercised that maternity in their intercession and in their prayer. And this also has a way of drawing people forward to live according to what their mission and their calling is. When a woman lives out of the truth of who she is, she draws out the vocation of her children, of her brothers, of her sisters, of her husband, all of her spiritual children. She calls them forth to be who they were made to be and to live the truth, live out of the truth of their identity. In a sense, she loves for their sake. When I was in Italy, I learned that they say I love you in a few different ways. In the romantic way, it's ti amo, ti amo. Doesn't that sound so romantic? Ti amo, I love you. But they have another way of saying it. Anybody here speak Italian? You're like, yeah, I speak Greek, sister. Ti voglio bene is the other way. Ti voglio bene. Voglio means I want. Bene is good. So a great way of saying I love you is ti voglio bene. I want your good. And in many ways, our spiritual motherhood is willing the good of another person for their own sake. Not so that it's a sake that serves my good, but it's for their good. And when we call our brothers and sisters forth to live their vocation, in a way what we're telling them is, you are of such a value that God has a mission for you in this world. And my love for you is to draw you forth toward that, to do your mission. And isn't that what Mary did? Think of Mary, there at the wedding. He's telling her, Mom, it's not time. And she says, yes, honey, it is. Fully knowing that that would be the start of watching her son do amazing things for humanity, but then also watch him bear the tremendous sufferings. There was a teacher that I had who kept a blog, and he was talking about the love that he experienced from the women in his own life. And he tells a story about when he would leave for work, one of his daughters would always wave at him, and so she couldn't see him anymore. And he said, every time I would leave home, my daughter would run outside and wave at me till I was fully out of sight. But this one night, it was raining a downpour. But she did the thing that she always did. In the rain, she stood there waving at me. So later that night, when I asked her, why did she stand out in the rain? She said, well, Daddy, because I don't want you to feel sad that you're leaving home. He said, I cannot describe to you the physical heartache her sincerity caused me. Her tender love drew out of me to be a better man. In the mirror of her femininity, and I think she was 5, this was the instrument of my redemption. Every time I watch her wave to me in that rearview mirror, I feel her tearing the fatherhood right out of me. He said this at the end, a woman's love can humanize you. It can call forth from you, as a man, chivalry, nobility, greatness. It can soften the hardest heart. A woman's love is fierce. So Mary's love in many, many ways drew her son forth. And our love draws our children forth too. Even if they're nowhere in our circle, even if our connection to them at this point is not tangible, we, by living faithful to our vocation, can help them be faithful to theirs. My own journey, I did not always understand how important it was to know the love of God for me, for myself. Even as I, was entering the community, the sisters would talk about God's love for you, God's love for you, God's love for you. And it was like, okay, I got it, but I didn't get it. I didn't get it. And I had to really take the steps that God had for me to grow in that understanding. Even when I was younger, because when the sisters did talk about it, they would say, remember a time in your life when you personally experienced God's loving care for you. And they would remind us to do that because these are like foundational to our identity. And I would encourage each of you, after this retreat, to take some time to see, when was the first time in my life that I actually knew God's love for myself? Because it's from that place that we go back to, like we enter that love again when we go to pray, when we experience God in the sacraments. It's that same love. It's the love that was there for us at the beginning, that called us into existence. When I was 15, I had a big crush because there was a boy when I was 13. I was standing next to my social studies project at the state fair, and he walked past me, and it was like all my antennas went straight up. Wow! And I thought, I think I really like this guy. Didn't know him from anything, but he was just so beautiful. I just knew I was going to probably marry him. So he's walking past me, and I do a little research, as a 13-year-old would. Found out where he lived. And I realized that he lived in the neighboring town to me. We didn't go to the same school, but that his mom was friends with my aunt. And I was like, oh, connections. So I kind of always had a place for him. So like we would go out to these, as I got older, like group friend things, like group things, and every once in a while he would be there. And every time he was there, my antennas were like dee 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 dee. So at a certain point, going to public school, some of my friends came up to me and they're like, Tracey, there's a thing going on at the church. It's a retreat, and it's happening at night. And they said it's going to be fun. And I was like, is that church? I'm like, yeah. I said, no, thank you. They said, well, such and such is going to be there. I was like, oh, okay, I'll go. So I made sure I had my the best sweater. My hair was just so, And I was very much attentive, all about like how I looked and how I was going to impress him. And so through the whole thing, I'm kind of not paying attention to what's going on in the retreat. I'm like really watching him. But then at a certain point, it was a retreat team, and they came out and they did this like skit. And I just remember, like, as much as I was just totally focused on this guy, I couldn't help it. I just started watching the skit, and I realized that number one, it was hilarious. Number two, it was funny, but it was also deep. Like, there was a meaning behind it, and the meaning connected me to God, and I felt it. I felt it happen. And the third thing was that all the girls that were on the team, they all looked kind of frumpy. And it's so funny, like at first I was kind of taken aback by like, oh, don't they even care what they look like? Didn't they know they were going to be in front of people? Like they didn't, this is the era of big earrings, big hair, and big makeup. My cousin would say the bigger the hair, the smaller the town. We had one girl that her hair was so big that they called her Oak Tree. And she was proud of it. So I'm like, wow, what's wrong with these girls? But then as I was with them, and I kind of saw it, like witnessed them, I realized they were hilarious because they were free. They weren't wrapped up in caring about what I thought about them. They weren't wrapped up in caring about what that boy thought about them. They were wrapped up in letting me know, a stranger, that God was real and that He loved me. And it was like I could feel all of my goals in life starting to shift. Like I thought happiness is you're the most beautiful, you're the most successful, you have the most money, you have the most friends, you date the cutest guy. It's always the superlatives of everything, the most, the best. And I realized for them, their happiness was that they wanted me to know God. They were living ti voglio bene. They had given away a year of their life. They had paused college or working or whatever for themselves so that they could give their lives and be assigned to teenagers that God was real. So I was like, wow, I like that. I don't know, I could never do that. I could never just just like leave everything for a year, you know. But I think that's so admirable, so beautiful. And then at a certain point, they had this thing where they prayed with us. Now before that, as I said, I was very intent on dating the right guy, hanging with the right kids. Everything I did was like, how can I go up the ladder? You know, if we had to dance, I remember even in the 6th grade, if I go to a dance, how do I get a boy to ask me to dance? If I dance with a boy, how do I make sure it's the cutest boy? You know, it's like always upping, 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 upping. And at one point, I remember going to this dance. It was at the fire station because it was free for whoever had it. And I wanted the oldest boy in the room to ask me to dance. He never did. He asked my little friend to ask him to dance with him. And she was so short that he had to kind of pick her up and dance with her. You know, the dancing where it's like you're both zombies. So I remember being in this retreat, and they said, you know, the team would pray with you if you wanted to have somebody pray with you. And I had never had that kind of experience before. I was like, wow, I don't even know what that means. So they sit me down, and it was just this big room, and we got to go sit next to one of the team. And I sat next to her, and her name was Mary. She had great curly hair, and she said to me, have you ever had anyone pray with you before? I said, no, my mom, but no one else. She says, well, what's weighing on your heart right now that you want to give to Jesus? And I had never had anybody ask me that. And so I just kind of sat there and started to think about it. And this flood of emotions, like all of my confusions and all of my questions and all of my disappointments and all of the things that I was having a hard time with that I didn't even have words for. It was like it just started to flood me. And I had 0 words for her. I just kind of looked at her, and I don't even know what I said, and I started to weep. And I didn't understand it. So she put her hand on my shoulder, and she started to talk to Jesus for me. Like, I felt like she said, this girl can't talk to you, God, but I want to talk to you on her behalf. And something about that released over me God's love. Because from the place she had her hand on my shoulder, I felt the Lord's love penetrate from the top of my head all the way down like a warm flow of water down through my feet. And I knew that was God. I knew it was His love. And I almost felt like He leaned over and He's like, I'm the oldest boy in the room. And I want to dance with you. And it sparked in my heart such a connection to God that as much as I liked the boy in the room, I wanted that love more. Because it was the answer to the question I kept asking. I kept asking, is there anything out there that's gonna last? Because I'd buy an outfit and the next week it was old, you know? I would make a good grade and then the next week it was like, who cared? Nothing seemed to last. But the love of God penetrated through everything. And it gave my life meaning. And it helped me to see that no matter what happens that changes in this world, God's love will never change. And it's easy to forget that love. It's easy to think that it hasn't happened to us. Over the course of Lent, I read a book from Lorenzo Albacete called The Cry of the Heart. And he said, grace is God's love. Grace is the sudden experience of that original love that created us, and that makes us persons, and that affirms that we are loved and worth everything. Each one of us are called to live from that love so that we can draw forth that truth in everyone who's entrusted to us. Our own children, our husbands, our parents, everyone. That you and I, the lovableness, my lovableness is not dependent on what I achieve, the successes I have, or my failures, but is dependent on one greater than I, who conceived me and whose love for me is my existence. So these things that we've mentioned, that I've talked about, this is all to help us to see how God entrusts us, first of all, with the gift of ourselves. That many times we can look at the way we're made, all of our imperfections. How many times we look in the mirror and say, oh, if I could only just change this, or why am I getting older, or blah, 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 whatever. Because the world is so intent on what's on the surface. God cares about the heart. And he's entrusted you with the body that you have, because that body is sacred to him. And that you, as you are a gift to this world. He's entrusted you with your relationships, and he's entrusted you with the care of the relationship he wants to have with you. But we have to bring all of that to him through a life of prayer. It's not just about coming to something nice on a Saturday, but throughout our days and into our nights, we can show up to the Lord in the most simple ways. I remember Father Stan Fortuna, he's a Franciscan priest. He called it a simple turn. Sometimes it's just turning to the Lord and saying his name, Jesus, in the course of the day. Or, one of the things I heard him say was, every time I want to say a bad word, I have to use that as like an alarm clock and realize what I really want to say is, help me, God. So to use the happenings of our days to show up to the Lord. And by doing that, we show up to him personally. We relate to him on a personal level. And the way that we can relate to him, the most privileged places we can encounter the Lord is through his word and in the Eucharist. As Catholics, we're very blessed. We have Jesus present in the sacred word, the sacred scripture. And as you maybe have seen just a little bit, the more we read it, the deeper it goes. It'll never be plumbed to its depths. And the Eucharist is there for us to just let the Lord love us. Be present to the Lord who is present to us. St. Paul tells us the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know how to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groans that are too deep for words. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit of God intercedes for God's people in accordance with his will. And we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. Sometimes all we need to do is surrender to the love of the Spirit of God and to his intercession for us. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take another 40 minutes for small group sharing. We'll take about, actually what we'll do is we'll take 15 minutes for small group sharing, and then we're going to come back at about 1:45, and I will lead you through like a little directed prayer, okay? And then and during the, like, so from 1:45, let's see,